The pleasure of having friends round for a meal can so easily become a chore if, for a start, you can't think what on earth to give them to eat, and secondly, perhaps your cooking skills don't really stretch much beyond convenience foods. Well, to overcome some of those problems, we've come here to Prue Leith, London School of Food and Wine. Now, Prue has suggested 3 different menus for 3 different occasions, and all of them, and perhaps this is the most important thing about them, incorporate some of the basic cookery skills, things that we all need to know, even when we're using the cookery books on our own kitchen shelves. The first meal we're going to look at is what we're calling a family supper, and the menu for this is taramasalata as a starter, and that's followed by sausages in tomato sauce with mashed potato, and as a sweet, strawberry ring. Well, Prue, that looks like a lovely menu, but why precisely have you chosen those exact dishes to do?
Well, because I think bangers and mash is underrated. It's one of the best things that the English do, and we do it beautifully. But also because it's a very simple menu for the cook. I'm sick to death of being the cook who slaves away in the kitchen while the whole family is having a good time in the drawing room. So basically it's very simple. The first course is taramasalata, which is a Greek cod's roe dish.
And before you launch into telling us about it, I think we ought to point out 2 things. One is that all these dishes are for 4 people, aren't they?
That's right.
And the second, that all the ingredients will appear later on, so there's no need to rush down to write things down straight away.
Right.
So proceed.
Okay, well, I'll just show you the ingredients for the taramasalata first. That's cod's roe. It's smoked cod's roe, and it's bought fresh in fishmongers. It's pinky in the middle, and it has this red skin on the outside. It's beaten to a paste with a little bit of wet bread. That bread's just been under the tap and is a bit wet. That helps to bind it together.
And you've taken the crusts off there, is that important?
That's right. Well, it's easier to bash it up if it hasn't got a crust on. It has garlic in it, not that much garlic, I must hasten to say, but a little bit of garlic, and it really is only for garlic lovers, because if you don't like garlic, forget about taramasalata. It's flavoured with lemon juice, and it has a lot of oil beaten into it, rather like mayonnaise. You beat the oil in slowly, and that makes it creamy and soft and pale and not too strong in flavour. Any oil will do. This is just an ordinary salad oil, but classically, and if you're very rich, you can use olive oil. That's what the Greeks would do.
So is that the special technique in this recipe?
It's making mayonnaise, basically. I mean, I'm making an emulsion, and you do that by bashing together some of the ingredients to a paste. I'll start by squashing the 1 clove of garlic, which I've peeled, into a bowl. And then you just gradually add the other ingredients, beating like mad all the time. Okay. I'll put the bread in, which, as I said, was wet. And I'm going to scrape the cod's roe off the skin, because it doesn't matter if you put a bit of skin in. This little red bit doesn't matter, but you want to get that tough membrane out. So
it comes off quite easily.
It doesn't come off too badly. Some of it, if the skin is soft, it's a little bit more difficult. This is quite a good tough skin. So that comes off like that. Let's forget about that a bit. And the first thing is you just bash it up together.
Wooden spoon is important?
Yes, you can make the whole thing with a wooden spoon. I hasten to tell you I'm not going to, because I have an electric whisk.
You're holding that very low down.
Yes, you know, if you hold a spoon at the end, you have no strength in your arm. But if you hold the spoon right at the bottom,
yes,
you've got much more control. So you get a sort of paste. Well, that would be quite nice to eat as it is, but it's a bit too strong. So we're going to start adding oil, and you add it drip by drip at the beginning, just a little bit like that, and beat it in, and then a little bit like that, and beat it in, and so on. And I think this is where I'll reach for the electric whisk, if you don't mind. Can you hold the bowl to this, because otherwise it's going to fly off.
You're still adding it a drop at a time?
I'm adding it pretty slowly, just a sort of steady stream.
Why is it so important to do it so slowly?
Because otherwise you get a curdled mass. What happens is all the oil runs out. You're trying to get the cod's roe and the bread to hold the oil. I'm not going to go on for 10 minutes because it's very boring to watch. So what I'll do is just fish out one that I've got half the oil in already, which is there. You see, it goes much paler. So I'll add this bit to it. And add a little bit more oil. Now you can go on almost as much as you like, really. The longer you go, the paler and the blander the cod's roe will be, and the thicker it will get. Nobody seems... Do you see how thick it's getting?
Yes.
The thing is, nobody understands that if you add more oil to mayonnaise or to cod's roe pattern, it gets thicker and thicker, not thinner and
Yes, you
thinner.
might assume that it would get thinner.
That's
and
right.
thinner, mightn't you?
And when you've got it really very creamy and nice, like that, you abandon that to Mary. And you want to flavour it with some lemon juice. I've got the juice of half a lemon here, which will make it a little bit thinner, but will help to stop the cloyingness of the oil, so you get a really sort of nice creamy paste like that. Don't put any salt in, because cod's roe is very salty anyway, but stick in lots of pepper. Now, you could serve that on toast for a snack, or as a dip for putting raw carrots in, or something like that at a drinks party. And I need a pie dish, Mary.
We got one.
Something to dish it up in. Thanks, that's lovely. And I'll just put it in, and I want to show you my patent trick for smoothing the top. If you take a spoon and you just go down it like that, you can make a nice little, hang on, I'll get it a bit straighter first, little waves in it. Like that. And then, if you wanted to put olives on it for a special occasion, olives are very Greek, and we could serve it with some pita bread, which we'll have a look at later. Okay?
Right, smashing. So that's the first course. Let's move on now to the main course. Now, you've chosen to make sausages. Most people don't bother to make them, do they? They just rush out and buy some.
And they buy very horrible, preservative-laden sausages which don't taste of anything. Homemade sausages are so easy to make that everybody ought to make them. They are a little bit expensive. I think that the cost of the ingredients for homemade sausages is just about the same as for the best sausages you can buy, and then you've got to make them yourself and store them or freeze them. But they do freeze well, and I make a lot at once, because then you can just fish them out of the freezer as you want. Now, what they consist of is minced belly of pork, which is what this is here. And I thought I'd just explain to you about belly of pork, because it's the part of the pig that streaky bacon comes from. It's also where you get spare ribs. You know, in American restaurants you get little grilled spare ribs, or Chinese restaurants. And that's what it is. It's the flesh and the fat off the belly, which is a very cheap cut, minced up, but not the skin. So you don't have the skin.
So you go into the butcher and ask for belly of pork.
And you ask him to mince it. It's important to ask the butcher to mince it towards the end of the day. I mean, you either have to go in tactfully at 5 o'clock, or you have to tell him you want him to mince pork, because otherwise he doesn't like to do it. Because if a butcher's mincing beef all day, the last thing he wants to do is put pork through his mincer, which means he has to wash it completely. So, unless you want to mince it yourself, which is a great labour. The other thing is breadcrumbs. Now, those are fresh white breadcrumbs, and I've made them in a liquidizer, which I thought I'd just show you with a few extra, because you can't buy fresh white breadcrumbs. You can only buy dried white ones, and they're difficult to get, or those awful ones that are dyed.
Yes.
So you just stick them in the liquidizer, perhaps not quite so many at once, that many, and stir them up. And you have breadcrumbs. I don't in fact need those, I just thought fine.
Could you keep those? Could you store them?
Yes, you can, but freeze them. They go mouldy if you just put them in a bread tin, obviously. Okay, now, what I've got in there is the minced belly of pork. Pork and fat. Don't worry if it comes a bit fatty, it should be fatty. 1 egg, and rubbed sage. That's dried sage, just rubbed up, about a teaspoon of it. But I thought I'd show you some fresh sage, because you can, of course, use fresh sage, and it grows like a weed, and it's worth having. But in fact, I prefer dried sage because it's easier to rub. You don't have to chop it. And you need a bit of salt.
Smell.
Doesn't it smell good? You need a bit of salt. About half a teaspoon. And can I stretch across to you? And lots of black pepper. But now you could flavour your sausages. I mean, that's basically sausages. You can flavour them with fennel, or with chopped onion, or garlic, or parsley, or
whatever
more or less
you like.
anything you like. And you don't need to have so much bread. The more bread you have, the softer the sausage and the more English it is. The more meat you have, the more firm it is, rather tough, but very meaty and solid, like a French sausage. Okay, so you start off mixing it like that, and then you mix it with your hands, which is the bit I like, for mud pie time. Just use your hands because it's the quickest and most efficient way you've got to mix things.
I think the children like watching this, don't they?
They like doing it. Well, my daughter loves doing it, but my son is very pernickety. He doesn't like mess on his hands. But when you've got it into a sort of nice paste like that, and well mixed, taste it. And I know it's raw pork, but you're not going to get anything dreadful from tasting raw pork. And there's nothing worse than making pounds and pounds of sausages and then discovering that you haven't got enough salt in it. So taste it. If you can't bear to taste raw pork, that tastes lovely, by the way. If you can't bear to taste raw pork, fry a little bit in a frying pan and taste it hot. But don't just chance it. Right, and then you just roll them into sausage shapes.
Oh, that's pretty easy, yes.
When you're rolling them, the trick is to get a handful, form it into a ball first, and then, once you've got it in the ball, then make it into a sausage.
Round.
Round first and then long. I think I'm making this a bit too big. We'll have it a bit smaller. Can you jam that pan on, do you think? I'll do it too. But it's all right, it's gone on. Now the trick about sausages, especially if they haven't got skins, like these, is to put them into hot fat. The fat can be butter or oil or dripping, anything you like, but make sure that it's really hot when it goes in, otherwise they're going to stick to the bottom of the pan and that's murder. I've made sausages now for years without any skins on them, and I've got to prefer them. But if you want skins for sausages, you can buy them. It's a bit difficult, you have to order them from a butcher. And then it's a great performance filling them in unless you have a machine. So I just forget about skins and do them like this.
Well, let's see you do these.
Okay, well when the fat is good and hot, you want to put the, let's just make sure it is, you put the sausages in and roll them around. I'm only going to do two for the moment. Until they get brown. They'll take about 4 minutes to brown and about 6 minutes to cook if they're small ones, and obviously twice as long if they're very big. So I'll leave those browning, just occasionally giving them a shake. But what I've got here are ready-made ones. They shrink a bit, obviously. In fact, I think those would have been bigger anyway.
Yes.
But they will shrink a bit because they'll lose some of their fat. But the way to tell if a sausage is cooked is by bouncing your thumb on it. If it's bouncy like that and quite firm, it's cooked. If it's very squashy like that, you can see that's very squashy. It's not cooked.
And you wouldn't be too hot to press?
Well,
Looking to
I
burn
might
yourself.
have asbestos fingers, but you could always press them with a spoon. You can feel with a wooden spoon.
Yes.
Well, I think we'll just leave those for a moment and talk about the sauce,
Yes,
shall we?
right.
Tomato sauce, normally bought in bottles and tasting very sweet and very vinegary, is an awful pity because it's easy to make. And you can make really marvellous herby Mediterranean tomato sauce. You need a can of sweet Italian tomatoes. You can use English homegrown ones, but they're a little bit too sour. They don't get enough sun. So those are lovely sweet ones from Italy. And you put them into a saucepan. And about a teaspoon of sugar. For all their Italian sun, they need a little bit of sugar. And a few slices of onion. And any herbs you like to lay your hands on. What I've got here is parsley, ordinary common or garden parsley, marjoram, that's marjoram. Marjoram is the same as oregano, or so nearly that you wouldn't tell the difference. Oregano is a wild form of marjoram. So if you haven't got fresh marjoram in the back garden, well,
Yes.
a bit of dried oregano will do, or oregano as it's sometimes called, and that is thyme.
And that all
common
goes in
thyme.
whole?
That all goes in whole, because at the end of it you're either going to fish them out, which is quite easy if you've got them in large bits, and have a sort of rather lumpy sauce, or you're going to sieve the whole thing for an elegant sauce. But first of all, you must simmer it. I'm bringing it rather fast to the boil, but I'll turn it down, and let it simmer, which is cooked very slowly so that the liquid boils in one part of the pan only, not bubbling all over, until it's reduced. First of all, it'll go rather more liquid as the tomatoes let out their juice. And then it'll become thick and syrupy again, and it takes about 6 or 7 minutes. And by that time, the onion and the herbs will have flavoured the tomato, and the sugar will have melted, and you'll have quite a good sauce. The only thing I haven't put in is the good old pepper. I mean, nothing happens in the south of France or in Italy without pepper, does it? So we'll do that. And I'll just leave that to simmer. But I have, in fact, made some, which I've pushed laboriously through a sieve. When you strain something, pushing it through a sieve, it's important to really work the wooden spoon on the wire mesh or the nylon mesh to push the onion and squash the flavour out of the herbs. Don't just strain it. You're sieving it rather than straining it. Okay, so then you have a rather elegant, smart.
But you wouldn't have to strain it if you didn't really want to go to that trouble.
No, you could
just
have it
take
all
out
nice.
the bits.
Yes, or you could just chop the herbs in the first place.
Yes, and leave
So you
them in.
needn't take anything out. Okay. So I think I'll just leave that there for a moment. And I'm going to mash potatoes. Now the secret of mashed potatoes is don't overboil the potatoes in the first place, because if you do, it's tempting to do it because you want them to be easy to mash, but if you overboil them, you get a sort of potato soup and all the potatoes in the water. So what I've got is potatoes that have just been boiled and are just drained. They're very hot. And I'm going to put them over the heat, dry, like that. And I'm going to mash them with no milk or no butter at first, just to get them
Isn't there a danger
mashed
that
and
they'd
dry.
stick on the bottom of the pan like that?
Well, you keep moving them, and of course you do need to have a good pan. I mean, this is a heavy copper pan, but any good thick pan, and if you keep moving the spuds around, you'll get good mashed potato. I must tell you, the professional cooks greatly frown on this instrument. It's called a potato masher, and I absolutely love it. But you can, if you were a really professional cook, you would either sieve them, or push them through a strainer, or mince them. If you mince potatoes, it's very quick and easy, especially if you're doing large quantities. Okay, so we have lump-free potatoes. Once you've got them steaming, dry, very well mashed, take the potato and push it all to one side of the pan, you see, like that. Then put the part of the pan where there's no potato over the heat, directly over the heat like that, and add the milk to that part of the pan. Then what you get is boiling milk before you add it to the potato.
Yes.
The alternative, of course, is to boil the milk and add boiling milk to it, but that means 2 pounds to
Why
wash
do you
up.
want hot milk and not cold milk?
Because if you add cold milk to it, first of all, it cools the potatoes down, and it doesn't absorb quite so well. You get much more soupy. It'll take much more hot milk than it will cold milk. So you wait until the milk there is pretty hot, preferably boiling, and then you beat it in. But I'll have to wait for a second. Okay, do you see it's beginning
Yes, it is,
to
just
bubble
round the edges.
Round the edges. Now, you beat that in. First it slops all over the place. And all the time I'm doing this over the heat.
This is where you need the elbow grease.
This is where I turn it down a little bit, I think. That's right. And if you're really enthusiastic, you beat it until it's even smoother than that. But I can't stay here all day. So the secret of good mashed potatoes is butter. So you put a bit of butter in. Quite a lot, I'd say, 1.5 ounces for that much potatoes, which is 1 pound. Or 2 tablespoons of butter, shall we say. And then you get really good, creamy, buttery mash. And salt. I think I better taste it. And a little bit of pepper.
Right, and that's our middle dish.
And
Are you going
that's
to dish
mashed
that up
potatoes.
for us and show us how it should look on a plate?
Right. Well, it's pretty simple. But I thought I'd just... I think it's a good idea to dish things all in one plate because it makes them look amazingly much better. If you have lots of separate little plates, it doesn't look half so good. Millie, have you got a big spoon for me? Because this is going to take me forever. Give me the ladle. That's fine. Lovely. It's my catering background coming to the fore.
I couldn't live without my plastic spatula for getting odds and ends like
Yes, I know.
out of the pan like that.
You know what they call that in the catering business? A Scotch finger. Those for getting the last bit out. Here, Mary. And now we'll put the sausages down the other side of the dish.
Just going to get them in.
Well, if I push them, might have to put those two there. Right. And then I think that it'll look nice if we pour a bit of tomato sauce all over it. So let's just do that. And I'm sure you know that old chef's trick of a little bit of chopped parsley.
Oh, pretty, yes.
To lighten the
Very nice.
look of it.
Right, well, shall I just take that over and put that on the table?
Right.
Or we go on to the next?
That's right. Well, the next thing I'm going to do is the choux pastry, which choux pastry is the kind of pastry that you get in smart French pastry shops, made into éclairs and choux à la crème and all those beautiful things. And there's only one problem with it, and that is that you want to measure the ingredients very, very carefully. And it has odd ingredients. I mean, this happens to be 7.5 fluid ounces of water, but don't worry, because it's all on the card that you'll see at the end of the program. But I'm getting my eyes right down to the level of the water, so that I can really see that it is 7.5 fluid ounces.
Yes,
if you look at a jug,
it looks more, doesn't it?
Exactly, it looks much too
Yes.
much. So you put the water into the saucepan, and you put the butter in with it. So what you've got in there is water and butter. And you bring them both together to the boil, quite slowly, not too viciously, because you want them to melt, the butter to melt and the water to boil at the same time. If you go too fast, nearly all the water will be boiled away before the butter melts, and then you'll have spoiled the quantities. And then you'll have stodgy pastry, and it'll be awful. So they must come up to the boil together. And when I've got them up to the boil, as soon as I've got, you see, they're not melted yet.
No.
But when I've got butter melted and the water boiling, really at a rolling boil, then I'm going to tip in all that flour at once and beat like blazes.
What exactly do you mean by a rolling boil?
A rolling boil is when it's bubbling all over the pan, not just at one corner. You know, it's quite difficult to... People often think poaching and simmering and boiling are all the same thing. But poaching is when the water is barely moving. There's no bubbles coming up at all, just the surface is moving a little bit. Simmering is when it's bubbling in one part of the pan only. And boiling is when it's bubbling pretty well in 2 or 3 places.
Yes.
And a rolling boil is when the whole thing is
Everywhere.
everywhere. We're not there yet. But I'll tell you about what's going to happen after I've got the flour in. We have to add eggs, and it's a little tricky because the recipe calls for 3 eggs, but it depends on how absorbent the flour is, how many eggs you need to put in. And I know it'll take at least 2 eggs, so I'll just crack those straight in. But it may not take the whole of the 3rd egg. So I'm going to crack that into a bowl and beat it up so that I can add half of it if I want to. Obviously, I could just add half of it like that, and I get only the white in and not any yolk.
Yes.
So. Okay, well, do you see, the butter's just about
That's
melted. And it's beginning to boil around the edges, but it isn't rolling yet. Now, do you see? We're beginning to have an absolutely rolling boil. It's bubbling all over the place. Okay? Can you see? Right, so in goes the flour, and then I simply mix it first and then beat it. And it goes sloppy at first, very lumpy and unattractive looking, alarmingly lumpy, I'd say.
Looks like the beginning of mashed potato again.
Don't worry. And then you beat faster and faster and faster until the mixture will peel away from the sides of the pan. Do you see it's beginning
Yes.
peel away? And by now I should have, hopefully...
It's quite hard work.
It is hard work. I've got no lumps and it's peeling away from the pan.
Yes.
I'm then going to tip it into a cold bowl to cool. Because if I added the eggs straight into it now, I'd just cook scrambled eggs, wouldn't I?
Yes.
Because the thing is too hot. So I'm going to spread the choux paste right up the sides like that, just to cool it off. And then I think I better wait a second or two, and then we'll start to add the eggs. So I put one egg in and beat like mad. First of all, it goes slippery and very difficult to control because it's sort of liable to shoot out over the kitchen table. But that business of cooling the pastry is quite important because otherwise you're going to spoil it all before you begin. Now, do you see the flour's beginning to absorb the egg again? And we've now back to a nice stiff wallpaper paste.
Yes.
Okay? So then we put the next egg in.
Same again.
Same again. First of all, it's slippery. Then it begins to absorb it. Of course, if you've got a nice big mixing machine, you do that. A mixing machine.
You've got to do it on a day when you're feeling you've got plenty of energy, haven't you?
That's right, and not in midsummer either. Hot work. Okay, now it's sticky again. And I'll put in about half that egg. Same performance. But what I'm aiming for is something called dropping consistency, which confuses people a lot. Dropping consistency is when the mixture will fall off the spoon in a lump. It won't run off like thick cream. I mean, thick cream would run off. I think I'm just about there. Do you see it's sort of glossy and shiny?
Yes.
But if I do it like that, it won't fall off until I give it a jerk, and then it'll come off in a blob. And that's dropping consistency. Reluctant, but it'll come with a jerk.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I'm going to use some choux pastry that we've already made because it's just easier to deal with cold pastry. And I'm going to put it into a piping bag. Do you know these things?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it has a nozzle at the end, quite a nice wide one. If you had a fluted one, you could make fancy eclairs or something, pretty shapes. But if you haven't got somebody to hold the bag open for you when you fill it, it's often very difficult. So tuck it over
Yes, that's a good idea.
a jug. Then put the pastry into there, like that. And you sort of squash it tight when you bring out the spoon so that you get all the pastry in there, which you then shoot down like that. And you pipe it straight onto a wet baking sheet. Now, if you notice, I'm holding the pastry bag very, very low. When people pipe wrong, it's because they come up here and it wobbles all over the place. You want to keep low down.
Yes.
Do you see? Pretty low. And you just go round a ring. Round and round and round. Make sure you get all the rest out of it. And then you bake it at gas mark 6. That's 400 degrees Fahrenheit, 200 degrees centigrade. And you bake it for about 25 minutes until it's really good and brown. And it just so happens that I have baked one, which you then need to cut in half to split it while it's still hot. So you need a sharp knife. A bread knife is very good for this.
Serrated.
Well, this is not a serrated one, but a serrated bread knife works very well. Cut it very carefully. You need a cloth to hold it with, otherwise you burn fingers. Lift off the top. And if there's a bit of uncooked pastry in the middle, which there isn't much here, you just take it out. There very often is. It depends how long you've left it in the oven. But I think that's all fine. And then you let it get cold and then fill it up with whipped cream and strawberries and a bit of strawberry jam. And it just so happens that I have another one, which is already cold. So I'm going to put a bit of strawberry jam in the bottom. Not too much because it is pretty sweet and you don't want to make it sickly. But don't forget there's no sugar in the pastry, and so you can have a bit of jam there. Then whipped cream, which you simply spoon in pretty generously. You could pipe it if you wanted to, but I think the trouble with piping everything, it looks a bit like a shop.
Yes.
So a good deal of whipped cream.
Beginning to look very good.
It's some family, this family supper. Then you put strawberries in it.
Just as many as fit on, I suppose.
Or as many as you have, or as many as you could afford. Or but in the height of the season, strawberries are quite cheap. And it really is such an easy luxury pudding for some sort of special family party. And then you can put a bit more cream on it if you like. But I think, and perhaps I won't put too much more on, because we've got quite a lot of cholesterol in there already.
Yes, somebody's going to get quite fat.
And then put the lid on, give it a squash down, and then take a little bit of icing sugar and just scatter it over the top like that.
Pretty. My goodness. It really does look the kind of thing you'd buy in a shop,
That's
actually,
right.
although I hate to insult you by saying so. Marvellous. Well, there we have our complete meal. Let's just take the final things over to the table, shall we? Shall I take the...
I'll bring the tarum salata.
Right, well, let's just go over then and put this on the table, and there we have our family supper with the tarum salata and the pita bread to go with it that Prue talked about, the lovely homemade sausages with their tomato sauce and potato, and the delicious-looking strawberry ring. We move on now to the buffet party, and the menu for this is lamb blanquette with grated courgettes, a spinach, bacon and yoghurt salad, and a cinnamon cheesecake. Now, Prue, what made you choose these particular dishes?
Well, mainly because they're easy, and I think, again, for a buffet party, you want to make sure the cook is with the guests and not slaving away in the kitchen. But also because they're a little unusual. I think we get awfully sick of chicken mayonnaise on a buffet.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning, the lamb blanquette.
Well, now, you start with the lamb cut up into nice lean chunks like that. And then you simply add to it the carrots.
Is that one carrot?
That's one chopped up carrot. Onions. And this is the unusual ingredient, the dill, which is fresh dill. You can buy it dried, and it's perfectly good. Fresh dill is particularly nice. And then the usual little flavourings like peppercorns and a bay leaf and a stock cube, because I haven't got any stock.
What
and I'm
kind?
going to use a chicken stock cube. And I'm going to use water. And you simply put that all in together, add the water, put the lid on and simmer very gently for about an hour until the meat is really tender. Then you strain off the liquid, which is what I've done here, and that's the meat all cooked and the carrot and onion which you leave in. Throw away the bay leaf and the bits of straggly dill and so on, but keep the liquid to make the sauce with. Now I'm going to make a roux, which is you melt the butter in there and add the flour when the butter's melted, and then simply stir the two together until you've got a sort of soft paste. The trick with a good roux is always to have a bit more butter than flour, otherwise you make lumps. And then when it's bubbling and a little bit grainy, about half a minute like that, add the liquid. If the liquid is cold, you don't need to worry about taking it off the heat. If you're adding hot milk to a sauce or hot stock, you want to take it off the heat and whisk like mad to get out the lumps before you put it back. But in this case, the liquid's stone cold, so by the time it's hot, the butter will have evenly distributed the flour. Then you want to flavour the sauce. Don't forget, we've had no salt or pepper put into anything yet. So a good deal of pepper, about half a teaspoon of salt, and a squeeze of lemon juice. Lemon with veal is very good for some reason. Don't understand why. And this is lamb, in fact, but lamb or veal. Have any blanquette. You know, blanquette means white stew. And white stew sounds so unglamorous, I thought we'd call it a blanquette. We have to wait for it to boil, because when it boils, it'll thicken a little. Do you see it's beginning to boil now? And it's slightly thickened, just slightly. You don't want it to great gluey sauce, just a slightly thickened one. Now, I'm going to add what is called a liaison, which sounds very smart, but what it means is something to thicken it a little bit further, and egg yolk, of course, will thicken it. And what I've got in there is a little bit of cream and an egg yolk, which I'll beat together. And when the hot sauce hits it, the egg yolk will cook a little bit and just thicken it a tiny bit more. So when I've got a good rolling boil, I'll pour a little bit onto there, mix it up, tip it back into the saucepan, use the back of the fork to taste it with. Lovely. Really is good. And then you simply pour that all over the blanquette.
That looks very good and very simple, really, once you know how to do the roux.
It is. You can decorate it with little fried bread croutons if you like. But it's certainly not necessary. Now,
Right, so that's the blanquette. Now let's do the things that go with it.
Well, what about the courgettes? Now, the courgettes are terribly easy. All you do is grate them on a cheese grater. Or, if you have one of these smart machines, you can grate them very quickly here.
It's quick.
It is quick, isn't it? And if you can just turn that butter on, Dilys, we'll get good. Oh, actually, let's put it on here because it's near already hot. Now you get the butter good and hot, and then you simply tip in the courgettes. And nobody really believes this, but you stir them for 30 seconds. And when they're cooked, and when they're hot, they're cooked, and that's all there it is to it.
Very tiny.
Yes, do. I wouldn't put any salt in at this stage because salt draws the moisture out of vegetables, and then you get rather wet mixture. But if you just do it for about 30 seconds and add pepper, you can always add salt at the last minute.
And you keep stirring them, I suppose, so that the top ones go to the bottom. And
Yeah,
so
but I mean, they're really cooked now. Do you want to taste one?
already?
Yeah, right. You taste one.
Let's dig in. It's rather nice, isn't
Cooked, isn't it?
Just cooked, but
That's
it's
all it needs.
still crunchy, which is rather nice.
That's
Very
right, and
good.
nice and bright green. It goes a horrible colour if you overdo it.
I like those.
Now, spinach salad is fairly unusual, but it's so delicious. I don't know why we eat lettuce all the time when there's spinach about. That's just washed spinach, broken up, and a little bit of fried, crisp bacon or grilled bacon. And if you want to pull the rib out of a spinach leaf, fold it in half like an envelope, and then just pull the rib that way,
Oh, that's clever.
so it doesn't take
Yes.
hours. And then the dressing simply consists of yogurt, salt, pepper, and lemon juice. Okay? And the last dish is the cinnamon cheesecake. Now, I've made a crust already, which I'll just tell you about because it's so simple that it seems to me the easiest and the best of cake bases. All it is digestive biscuits, crushed up, mixed with melted butter, a little bit of cinnamon for flavour, and sugar if you like it, and pressed into a flan ring. You then bake it in any sort of moderate oven, it doesn't matter if it's too hot or too cool, until it feels crisp. Take it out, let it get cold. And then you fill it with a mixture of cream cheese, which is what I've got there, eggs, double cream,
Nice and rich.
very rich, sugar, and cinnamon. About 1.5 teaspoons of cinnamon. I mean, did I say cinnamon?
Yes.
I'm wrong. Vanilla.
Oh, vanilla.
1.5 teaspoons of vanilla. It is a cinnamon
Cinnamon's
cheesecake,
coming,
but
is
the
it
cinnamon
later?
comes later.
Right.
Vanilla. And you mix that up together. It must be the most cholesterol-laden cake, but it's so delicious it's worth it.
And what is
It
the
can't be
technique we're looking for here?
Well, we're really baking eggs. You see, what we're doing is making a custard. The eggs are going to set into a custard.
And one of the problems with egg custard, surely, that I remember, is that the custard usually sinks to the bottom of the pastry if you're using pastry. Is that why you're using biscuits?
Well, the biscuit crust does help a lot, and also that's why you bake it in advance. Now, you put that into a moderate oven, gas mark 5, 190 centigrade, 375 Fahrenheit, and then you take it out when it's cooked, and it'll look like this, which, as you see, is a set custard.
Yes.
You then mix a little bit of sour cream with sugar, just enough to stop it being too sharp. Pour it over the top, spread it as evenly as you can, like that. And then shake. Now this is what nobody believes. You shake a lot of cinnamon onto it.
Why don't people believe that?
Because people always think you have to be very gentle with spices, but cinnamon is one of the ones you can eat by the teaspoon. It's lovely.
And I suppose it sinks in a bit too.
It does, and the cream sets a little bit, and if you refrigerated it for a couple of hours, then you have an absolutely solid top.
Well, that looks very good. Let's take them all over to the table. So there we are, the dishes here for one buffet party. Prue has actually made enough in quantities for 4 people, but of course you could add to it double the quantities or whatever and make as much as you wanted. Let's look now at the menu for our third meal, and this is the grand occasion, the dinner when you want to impress somebody, perhaps the boss. And we're starting off with cold soup, borscht, followed by a salmon in pastry case, and then the last dish of all is 2 really. It's a green fruit salad and a ginger syllabub. And once again, Prue, why these particular dishes?
Well, I think you really said it. If you have people to dinner, you have to impress them. At least it's nice to impress them. I mean, why spend all day slaving away in the kitchen if people aren't going to clap when you bring the food onto the table?
That's what you're expecting.
That's right. So you have to have food that is going to be a little bit dramatic and delicious, and everybody else is going to think, gosh, she's clever. I couldn't do that.
Let's start off with the soup then.
Well, the soup is very easy. It's borscht, Russian beetroot soup. And you start off with either cooked beetroots or beetroots that you have cooked yourselves. We've in fact cooked them from raw. They take hours. You just boil them in water, and you keep the water that you've cooked them in. If you have just bought them in a shop already cooked, then you will have to just add ordinary water. But don't worry, because there's so much flavour in everything else that it doesn't matter if there's no. Now you need to add a little bit of the water as you liquidize. We'll put the last one in. You don't want to add too much at once to these machines because they clog a bit. So when you have a smooth beetroot puree, looks rather like raspberry juice, put it into the bowl, and the other part of the soup is a milky, oniony potato mixture. And what I've got here is butter, which, when it was melted, we added 1 potato sliced up and a sliced onion. And you can see that that I've cooked them very, very slowly for about 10 minutes until they're cooked, but not browned at all. And now I'm going to add the milk to that, turn the heat up a bit. Oh, spilling it all over the place. Add the milk. Add a stock cube. That's particularly important if you've used bought cooked beetroots and haven't got the beetroot water. And
what
about
kind of stock cube?
A chicken stock cube. And about a teaspoon of ground cumin, like that. That's beetroot on my hands, I hasten to tell you. But mix it up like that, and then simmer for about half an hour so that the flavour of the cumin and the onions can really get into the milk. But be careful when you're simmering milk, because it boils over terribly easily, doesn't it? So I'll turn that right down and simmer it for half an hour. But as we haven't got half an hour to waste, I've already simmered it and liquidized it exactly as we liquidized the beetroot. And in here, I've got that milky onion cumin mixture, which I now add to the beetroot.
Oh, there's a lovely smell.
This is good, isn't it? And then salt, pepper. You can turn that one off, I think, because just keep us. And mix that up together. And you get this really marvellous colour,
Isn't it?
And then you want to add cream, as much as you like, really, but I've got about 1/4 pint of single cream there. And that's really it. Taste it, just in case you haven't got enough salt or pepper or anything. It's lovely. And then when you serve it, you chill it very well and serve it in a bowl or in individual bowls. If you want to put it into individual soup bowls, that looks quite nice. But leave it a little bit streaky. I think it looks nice.
It does. It looks
slightly
spectacular,
streaky.
doesn't it?
And then when you serve it, put a few blobs of sour cream onto it, or into each individual bowl. Blob per person, straight out of the carton. And some chopped fresh chives. That's
My
pretty
goodness,
sort
that's
of dramatic
lovely,
colour,
isn't
isn't it?
Yes. That's wonderful. Right, thank
I'll
you.
give it
There's
to you.
our spectacular first course.
Now, the next course is the real pièce de résistance, which is a fish wrapped up in pastry. It can be any kind of fish. I've in fact got salmon, but I mean that really has to be a very important guest who
Yes,
comes
it
to
does.
dinner and deserves salmon because it costs so much money. But haddock fillet is very good, or even cod is marvellous. You need something with big fillets. Now I've got 1/3 of the pastry and I'm rolling it out to make the base to put the fish fillets on. And this is frozen puff pastry, just bought in a supermarket. And it's marvellous stuff. It's absolutely indestructible. It doesn't matter what you do to it. It doesn't matter if you turn it. You don't need to worry about all the rules for pastry cooks about cold hands and warm heart and all that. And then when you've got it about as quite thin, about, they would say, the thickness of a penny, a new penny,
Yes.
I suppose. Quite thin. Cut it out into a fish shape. Chonk, 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 chonk. With a
This
bit
is
of
where the
tail.
artistic bit comes in.
Now, this is just for fun. I mean, you could just have it straight, but it's more fun if it's like that. Put it on the back of a baking sheet, because when you want to slide it off, it's much easier if it's on the back.
Is it a greased baking sheet?
No, just like that. If you wet the baking sheet, by the way, it's supposed to make the pastry crisper and rise better. It's not strictly necessary. As I said, with these frozen pastry, it'll rise anyway, whatever you do to it. Prick it all over to stop it rising unevenly, and then you put it in a very hot oven, gas mark 8.5 or 9. That's 450 Fahrenheit, 220 centigrade, so that's jolly hot. And you bake it for about 15 minutes. Then you get it out, and you get it cold, and that's what you have, a little baked fish, which you then cover with semolina, which is very good and absorbent. And it stops all the juice from the fish sogging up the pastry. You then put the fish fillets on. 1, 2, like that. And then flavour them with, well, you could use whatever you like, but I'm going to use tarragon, which are these tarragon leaves. It's a very good herb for fish. It's got a rather fennelly taste. And then a little bit of salt, quite a lot of pepper, lemon juice.
Just sort of one sprinkle.
Yes, about a tablespoon of lemon juice. And a lot of butter. I've melted the butter, but you could just put it on in little blobs. And then you roll out another piece of pastry and cover the top. I've got one ready rolled out here. And you just put it over the top like a baby's blanket. Make it sure you're not stretching it too much. Mm. And then cut it round the edge, leaving yourself about an inch margin to tuck in underneath. Like that. I'm using the back of the knife all the time because I don't want to cut the baking sheet or scratch the board. Then you need one of these palette knives to lift the corners of the pastry so you can just tuck the pastry underneath. There we are. Now, if you want to make it look like an amazing fish, you can either use a knife and make scales in the pastry like that.
Oh yes, how clever.
It's quite fun to do, actually. Of course, you don't have to do any of this, but I think it's quite fun. Or you can use a teaspoon and make rather big scales.
Oh, that's very good too. Depending on the fish you use, I suppose, yes.
And if you wanted to have an eye, you could stamp out with a pastry cutter or a sherry glass or something, an eye, which you just stick on there. And then paint the whole fish with beaten egg.
The whole egg, is that, or just the yolk?
Yes, the whole egg just beaten up with a little bit of salt. If you beat it up with salt, it makes it much more liquid and it runs easier. That's right. And you bake it, you paint it all over, and then you put it into a very hot oven. That's gas mark 8 or 9. That's Fahrenheit 450 and centigrade 220 for 20 minutes, and then turn the oven down to gas mark 5. That's 375 Fahrenheit and 190 centigrade. And then the fish will be cooked as well as the pastry.
How long do you leave it in at the second temperature?
Another 20 minutes. So it's 40 minutes altogether, 20 minutes at the high temperature and 20 minutes at the low temperature. I've got one cooked.
And doesn't that look lovely? Well, this is where you want your applause, of course. I should have been clapping
right
for you. That's beautiful.
Isn't it pretty?
Well, I should think that would stun anybody. Marvellous. Let's now move on then to the dessert, shall we, and see
Right.
how spectacular that is too. This is...
Well, it's very pretty. It's just a fruit salad, really. But it's made with entirely green fruit. And I think it's nice to have a fresh dessert after all that rich
Yes.
pastry and things. And it consists of Chinese gooseberries, which are these funny furry things, and green gages, grapes, apples, melons, anything you can lay your hands on as long as it's
green.
green.
Yes.
And that's what I've got here, which I've already made. Now I've got it in a syrup. The thing about a syrup is it keeps the fruit salad looking very nice. And to make a fruit salad syrup, all you do is add sugar to water. That's about 12 ounces of sugar, 6 ounces of sugar and 12 ounces of water, and a little bit of lemon juice. And then you just dissolve the sugar.
Just heat it slowly.
Heat it slowly and then get it cool, and then mix the fruit into it.
That's simple.
So that's not too difficult. And then I think we'll have a ginger syllabub with it, which is really just instead of whipped cream, but it's gingery cream, because ginger and melon goes very well together,
Yes.
doesn't it? And in fact, this is rich enough to serve by itself in a little coffee cup for pudding if you wanted it, without the fruit salad. I've just got the whipped cream here. Now that's double cream whipped up. And if you've got, as I have there, about half a pint of double cream, you want to add a half a pint of other ingredients, which are ginger marmalade, which is just marmalade very heavily flavoured with ginger.
Which you'd buy.
Which you buy, sometimes called ginger preserve, and advocat, which is bought in a bottle store or a liquor store or supermarket or something. And you need about 1/4 pint of that, and the same quantity of the marmalade going into the 1/2 pint of cream. So you've got more cream than anything else. And that's really it, believe it or not.
It's very simple.
You just mix it up, and it is absolutely delicious.
And strong.
It's not very strong because the cream is so mild. And you can serve it either in dollops with the fruit salad, or, as I said, chilled in little pots.
Little coffee cups, you said?
Yes, little pots, or ramekin dishes, or coffee cups.
Yes.
Or you don't want too much because it's so rich.
Very nice. Well, that's lovely. So there we have our final posh meal. Shall we take all this over to the table as well? So there we are, our grand dinner, specially designed to impress. And my goodness me, I think it would. Combination of colours, particularly when they're all here together, look really lovely, don't they? Mm. Prue, thank you very much indeed for having us here at your school. Thanks to your assistants too for all their noble help and effort, but particularly thanks to you, I think, because these are all your ideas and you've shown us so very clearly how it all has to be done.